If you have your Bibles, turn to the book of John, chapter 12, and we're going to get started right in verse 1. John chapter 12, starting in verse 1. We are beginning a brand new series today called The Ascension. This series is going to take us through the end of April, and really all we're going to do is we're going to chronicle Jesus' steps from today all the way to the time that he ascends to the Father. And Easter is going to be a part of this. And honestly, I'm so excited because we're going to be spending time on portions of text that are just so powerful. And this window in Jesus' life is just so rich. It is so profound. It is so powerful. And for us to get a dive into it and try to mine out whatever truth, however much truth we can, really only will make our lives that much better. Well, in this time of quarantine, as many of you know, I'm going to go grab my Bible, there's a whole lot of time at home. And like I mentioned, we have 5 kids, and so that means a lot of Netflix. It means a lot of Disney Plus, a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows. And so this last week, I was sitting with my 2 younger kids, Hezekiah and Evangeline, as they were watching, they were on Disney Plus, and they were watching Cars, the movie Cars, the Pixar movie Cars. Anyone who knows anything about the Hall family know we love us some Pixar, love us some Disney. And they were watching Cars, and there's a part in the first Cars where Lightning McQueen is told that if he wants to turn right, he needs to turn left. And he's told it by this character named Doc Hudson, and he's this legendary, racer. And Lightning McQueen's like, that's ridiculous. Turn right to go left. What does that even mean? How is that even possible? And then you fast forward to the end of the movie, and it's actually the thing that causes him to win the day and win the race and be the champion that he's always wanted to be. He actually realizes that it's true that if I turn right when I'm going left, that it actually leads to some, manner of success, that what Doc Hudson said was actually true. And as I was watching the movie, I started thinking to myself, and really what's happening in that moment is Lightning McQueen is being presented with a paradox. Really a truth, wisdom, advice that on the surface looks ridiculous. It looks contradictory. It looks like there's no way that this can be true. But when you actually mine it out and put it into practice, it is absolutely true. And as a follower of Jesus, what you need to understand is that the Christian life is full of paradoxes. You just go through the Bible and you just see dozens and dozens of them that we are presented with paradoxes, truths that on the surface seem contradictory, that when you actually put them into practice are 100% true. Take a look at just some of the examples, okay? We see unseen things. We conquer by yielding. We find rest under a yoke, okay, that would be perceived as bondage. We reign by serving. We are made great by becoming small. We are exalted when we are humble. We become wise when we become fools for Christ's sake. We are made free by becoming slaves or bondservants. We gain strength when we are weak. We triumph through defeat. We find victory by glorifying in our limitations, and we live by dying. These are just a handful of the paradoxes that we are presented with as a follower of Jesus. This is just baseline. This is elementary. This is just a part of being a follower of Christ, is learning to process and practice these paradoxes. And so, since we are presented with so many, since really the Christian life in and of itself is a paradox, I think it's important for us to understand how we practice a paradox. that as followers of Jesus, how do we approach something that seems contradictory and yet have the courage to put it into practice and experience the life and abundance that is within it? In our text today, we're going to see a woman named Mary who is not only practicing a paradox, but she actually teaches us how to do it and why it is so important. Let's pray. Jesus, we love you so much. And God, we need you in these next few moments to make your word come alive to us and change the way we live. God, we need this truth today. God, we need this truth in this season of life that we find ourselves in. Lord, challenge us. Speak to us through your word today, Father, in your precious name. Amen. Okay, John chapter 12, we're going to start right in verse 1. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said to him and to us, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me." Now, to get the richness of this text, you really need to understand what has happened in the chapter before. In John 11, it's an emotional roller coaster. Okay, the chapter begins with this knowledge, right, that Jesus is gaining, that his dear friend Lazarus is sick. He's on his deathbed. He's about to die. And the way Jesus responds to this news is not to hurry to him, but to actually stay right where he's at. And he actually waits several days before he actually heads to go and see Lazarus, who is reportedly on his deathbed. When Jesus decides to go to Bethany, where Lazarus is, he sees his two sisters, Mary and Martha, and they're actually angry with Jesus. They're like, "What took you so long? That we told you he was sick, he was about to die, and you stayed where you were at, and now you're here, and he's dead. There's nothing you can do. He is gone. He's been mummified. He's been buried. He's in a tomb. He's been there for about 4 days. It's too late. You had your chance, and now something has happened that is beyond even you, Jesus." And Jesus just simply asks, "Take me to where he's buried." So he goes to the tomb of Lazarus. It's a very famous scene in the Bible where Jesus is moved by the grief of others. He sees people grieving the death of Lazarus, and he's brokenhearted by it. And so he himself begins to weep just because he's so moved by the grief of people that he loves. And he calls out to the tomb, "Lazarus, come forth." Lazarus, he tells them to move the tomb. Some people are like, "Oh, I don't know if that's a good idea. He's been there for 4 days. He's really dead," which means he really stinks. And it's going to be embarrassing for him and the whole family if you do this. And Jesus just says, move the stone away. He calls Lazarus out. The guy comes walking out, fully alive, fully restored, fully renewed. It's this amazing miracle. It just shocks the entire region. And then you pick up in the next chapter at this meal that was originally intended to be part of a funeral, and now it is a part of a celebration. It was originally intended to grieve a man that had died, and now it is a meal designed to celebrate the man who brought that dead man back to life. Oh, and the dead man is sitting at the table. The guy who was dead just moments ago, days ago, is now sitting at the table with Jesus, with his friends. Everyone is there. And it's this incredible scene. And in the midst of all of this, Mary anoints the feet of Jesus. Mary displays this extravagant, almost irresponsible, reckless act toward Jesus. Now, this is not uncommon. What Mary is doing is not uncommon. The elementary principle of washing feet at a meal like this was something that would happen all the time. It was customary that you would walk into a home at a meal like this, and there would be a wash basin, a water basin for everyone who had journeyed along the way and their feet were dirty to wash their feet. But they would typically do it themselves. And if there was an honored guest, if there was somebody who was showing up that was, a big deal, it was a big deal for them to be there at the meal, then they would actually take this perfume and they would put just a few drops of it in the water, just to honor the person that was there and was using the water to wash their feet, but then also to just like increase the atmosphere, just to let them know that, man, this is a special thing that you're here. And so we're just using a couple of these just drops of this very expensive perfume to show you how honored you are. And Mary just blows through all of this. She doesn't even use the water. Mary walks in and she takes the whole bottle. And she pours the entire, most scholars would say it's about 11 ounces, okay, on the feet of Jesus. And it would be easy to almost get lost in the romanticism of this, to get lost in it's just so extravagant. She just loves Jesus so much, and really miss out on the depth of this sacrifice, okay? That really miss out on what this represents for us as followers of Jesus. This bottle of perfume that Mary is using is easily a year's wage worth. That this is well over a year's wage, that somebody would work an entire year, save every single penny that they would earn, and they would spend it on this 11-ounce bottle of perfume. It was extremely valuable. Most women who owned something like this was their inheritance. This is what they would pass down. This is what they had to be proud of. This is what they would hand down to their children, their grandchildren as an inheritance. That's how valuable of a commodity it was. And here is Mary pouring out all of it onto the feet of Jesus. But it's so much more than just the perfume. This environment, the space that Jesus is in, is a masculine space. The Jewish home was very clear that there were spaces where men were only allowed. There were spaces where only women were allowed. It's a very patriarchal society. So women had very little freedom, very little value, very little rights. Okay, men really controlled much of it. And this space that Jesus is with Lazarus is not a feminine space. This is a masculine space. So for Mary to even enter into this area is highly, highly risky. And the fact that she would get down and wash someone's feet, this is a job that was reserved for the lowest level of servant in the land. And in many areas, this was a job that was considered so demeaning, that was considered so insulting and condescending. It was considered such an insult that the only possible way that you would ever be called or told to wash another person's feet was if you had committed a felony. In many parts of the region, this was an act that was actually illegal to perform. And so here is Mary entering this masculine environment, performing this extremely humiliating task, and then letting her hair down. In the Jewish culture, a woman's hair is precious. It is personal. It is private. It is meant to be kept up. And at this time, only your husband was allowed to see your hair when it was down. Anything else, putting your hair down in any other environment, was considered scandalous. 100% scandalous. Most times, the only women you would see in public with their hair down were prostitutes, or women who sold themselves. And so here is Mary breaking through all of these boundaries, all of these guardrails, and performing this act that is, man, it is scandalous, it seems reckless, it seems irresponsible, it seems wasteful. And yet here she is performing this amazing act that Jesus is honoring and glorifying. What you really have to understand is that Mary is not just pouring out perfume. She is pouring out herself. Mary is emptying herself at the feet of Jesus. She is offering herself to Christ. She is saying, she's emptying everything, her pride, her acceptance, her reputation, her character, her security, her money, her inheritance, everything. Everything. This act, it symbolizes everything. She's sacrificing it all for the sake of Jesus. She is abandoning all reserve in regard for Jesus. It is a paradox. It is exactly what Jesus talks about. Just farther down the chapter, just go to verse 24 and look at what Jesus tells some Greeks that he is teaching. He says, truly, truly, it's an example of another paradox that we're presented with as followers of Jesus. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Whoever loves his life loses it, and whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. If anyone serves me, he must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. This is what Mary is doing. Jesus is saying, is like, if you want to live the type of life that I'm talking about, you have to die to yourself. If you want to find your life, you have to lose it for my sake. And that is exactly what Mary is doing. She is practicing a paradox. She is losing herself to find it all for the sake of Jesus. So here's the question. This is the most important question. How does she do this? How does she do it? Because this feels so hard. And I think anybody who's been a follower of Jesus for any length of time, and for most people, I think they look from a distance, they look at the Christian life and they just say, that doesn't make sense. It seems silly. It seems counterintuitive. And it is. It totally is. It 100% is. And so the question is, how does Mary do this? And we get our answer in Jesus' response to Judas. Take a look at what he says. He says, leave her alone. Leave her alone. Because my guess is the only reason Judas feels like he can speak up in this moment is because technically what it looks like is that Mary is breaking Levitical law. That you go to the book of Leviticus and you see that being wasteful to this degree is actually against Levitical law. And so Judas he's trying to call out waste. He's trying to say, this is irresponsible. She is not doing her job as a steward. She is not stewarding the things that she has been given, like we have been commanded to in the book of Leviticus. My guess is that's the only thing Judas can stand on. And Jesus is saying, leave her alone. so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me. What is Jesus saying here? What is he saying? Because when you translate the original language to like modern day English, especially in the ESV, you kind of lose some of really the intent of what Jesus is saying, what really Jesus is articulating. And when you look at the text, what is really being articulated by Jesus is this: Mary is anticipating my death. That's what Jesus is saying. He's like, hey, leave her alone. Mary is aware of something that is about to happen to me, and she realizes that it is for her. And this is an appropriate response for death and burial. Mary is aware. It's like she's in this house, and how she's able to connect the dots, like I don't know. But there's a moment in which she is able to realize what Jesus is about to do. Because remember, this is the same chapter of the triumphal entry. Jesus is about to enter Jerusalem, where he is going to be betrayed, arrested, murdered, and come back to life, okay? So it's like Mary is looking into this situation, and she can see what is happening. And the only way she knows to respond for what she is thinking Jesus is going to do is to empty herself for the sake of Jesus. And Jesus is letting all of us know that what is driving this response, what is driving this extravagance, what is driving this generosity, what is driving this selflessness and sacrifice is gratitude. It is a grateful response for what Jesus is about to do. And this, brothers and sisters, church family, this is so, so important when it comes to living the Christian life and practicing the paradoxes that we are presented with on a daily basis. That we must practice them from the motivation of gratitude and nothing else. We cannot practice these because we think that it's going to make us worthy, because it's going to make us accepted, because somehow it's going to allow me to fit in, that somehow it's going to make sure and cement the fact that I am good, for the esteem or praise of other people, or for the reward. We cannot allow our motivation to become anything other than grateful response for what Jesus has done. For us to practice paradoxes, for us to put these things into practice and live this counterintuitive life, we have to grasp, behold, believe the paradox that Jesus has already practiced, okay? The fact that Jesus would conquer death, conquer the grave, that he would do away with fear and anguish, that he would put it all to death, that he would overcome the world through some military might, through some grand military revolution. No, through death and resurrection. It is this paradox that drives our lives. That Jesus overcame it all through death and resurrection by laying it all down, sacrificing it all, even his own very life. And when we grasp that and we are so grateful for what he has done, then that drives all of our activity. And it is so important for us to have the right motivation when we try to practice these paradoxes, because it is counterintuitive. There is something within us that says this doesn't make sense. What are you talking about? What do you mean, be generous? Like, and then I will be blessed. What? That makes no sense. What my nature says is that I'm going to hoard, and I'm going to keep, and I'm going to protect, and I'm going to self-preserve. I'm going to do all these things, and then I'll be blessed, because then I'll have more than enough. When Jesus says that if you want to be exalted, you must be humble, that if you want to be exalted, you have to prioritize other people. You're like, that doesn't make any sense. I'll never get ahead. If I just keep putting other people ahead of me, if I keep, living for the glory of God and the good of others, and what part of this equation do I come in? Like, who looks out for me? What happens to me? It makes no sense. It's counterintuitive. We get anxiety. We're like, oh no, this person's going to pass me up. I'm going to miss out on this. And all of these opportunities I'm not going to have in my life if I prioritize other people and live for the glory of God. Oh my goodness. And yet, when we practice it, we see that it is absolutely true, that when we prioritize others, that when we live for the glory of God and the good of others, that all of a sudden we ourselves are somehow miraculously, divinely exalted by the Lord. I'm telling you, it is counterintuitive. It does not make sense on the surface, but when you mine it out and actually have the courage and are moved gratefully to put it into practice, you see that it is absolutely true. But it's not just counterintuitive, it's countercultural. Church family, here's what you need to understand. Anytime you put or try to live out any paradox that the way of Jesus presents you with, there will be Judases in your life. There will be people that criticize and judge your choices. There will be people that look from the outside and say, that just seems irresponsible. That just seems foolish. That doesn't seem practical. That doesn't make any sense. Oh my goodness, did you hear about so-and-so? Did you hear about what they're deciding to do? Did you hear about all of these things? I mean, there will always be Judases. It is countercultural. We live in a world that does not operate by this same design. And so if we don't have a motivation of gratitude, we will crumble underneath the weight of our own intuition, our own flesh, and we will crumble underneath the weight of our culture and the Judases that exist that criticize, judge, and demean and question every choice we make that is seemingly contradictory or seems contradictory on the surface. We absolutely have to do this from a position of gratitude. It's the only way we will be successful. I heard a story the other day that I feel like illustrates this point really well. There was a man who was rafting on a river in Maine. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with different types of dams that exist on rivers, but there's a type of dam that's called a low head dam. And these things are actually called by rafting, canoeing, people who do those things recreationally. They're called drowning machines because they create a whirlpool. Oftentimes, they create a wake by the waterfall that it creates a whirlpool and oftentimes leads to hundreds and hundreds of people every year drowning in these whirlpools. And there's a man in Maine who was rafting and wasn't aware that there was a low head dam that was right ahead of him. And he thought he could navigate it. Instead of trying to turn around and avoid it, he thought, I could probably navigate this with my raft. He was kind of an experienced whitewater rafter. And so he got down to the bottom, and unfortunately he couldn't, and he fell off of his raft, and he got stuck in this whirlpool at the bottom of the dam, and quickly just tried to swim his way out of the whirlpool, but wasn't strong enough. He wasn't strong enough to get out of its grip. And there were onlookers on the shore that were watching this whole thing take place, and they couldn't go into the water because they would have been sucked into the same whirlpool. And so what would happen is that the whirlpool would suck him in and pull him under, and then he would emerge, and he would try frantically to swim away with all of his might. He would try so hard, but he was unable to get away. And then he would be pulled back in for some time, and then he would come back up, and then he would just swim and swim and swim and swim and swim. Never able to get away. And actually, he didn't die from drowning. He ended up dying from hypothermia, where he was just in the water for too long, and he got too cold. And at the moment he died and stopped trying to save himself, his body was sucked under And 5 seconds later, it was spit out and it drifted gently to the shore. I think this story, man, it is exactly what we are presented with on a regular basis as followers of Jesus. That what would have saved this man was the thought of allowing himself to die. That if he could have just let go and allowed himself to seemingly die, he would have been spit out and he would have found life. But that just, it didn't compute. It didn't compute. It was counterintuitive. It was countercultural. It didn't make sense. The math didn't add up at the time. And so we just do what we know. We do what seems right in the moment. And we just struggle and we strive and we effort and we try to save ourselves, and we try to find everything that Jesus has already found for us in our own strength. And we're just like, oh, we're trying and we're trying and we're trying. And we inevitably end up dying, never having experienced the life that we could have. And yet we have this amazing example of Mary, who emptied herself out, motivated by absolute gratitude for what Jesus is about to do for her. She dies to herself. She loses herself for the sake of Jesus, and in doing so, finds incredible, incredible life. It is the opportunity we are presented with time and time again as followers of Jesus. And the only way we will ever practice or experience the fruit of it is if we really understand and grasp everything that Jesus has done for us. And then there is no paradox that we could ever be presented with that we would not have the faith and the willingness to accept and practice. Because if this God would do this for us, then I will believe anything that he says, and I will do anything that he tells me to do out of grateful response for what he has already done for me. Church family, I want to pray for you, but we also want to give you a few minutes. We're going to have a couple songs going on, and we want to give you an opportunity to let us know how we can pray for you. Specifically, it's a great time in our service to engage and interact and be together. And I just hope you know we love you. Oh my goodness. I cannot wait to gather with you again and celebrate Jesus with you in this audience. But until then, let's try to interact online. Let us know how we can be praying for you guys. Jesus, we love you so much. God, we need you. Lord, the Christian life is a paradox. It is a paradox that we would lose ourselves to find life. It doesn't compute. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. And yet, Jesus, it is absolutely true. So, Father, wreck us with the cross. Ruin us with what you have done for us, Lord, so that we will willingly lay it all on the line. Abandon everything for the sake of you. Help us today, Jesus. In your precious name, amen.